They laughed out loud at my brother's wedding when I walked in wearing a suit that looked like it came from a thrift rack, the heat of magnolia blossoms sticking to my collar. I'm Calder Wynne, 55. An internal controller clutching my father's silver pocket watch still intact then. Ever had a moment where dignity cracked louder than the applause? The church smelled of polished wood and magnolia blossoms, their white petals tucked into vases along the aisle. Heat pressed through the stained glass windows, though the calendar still claimed it was spring. I wiped my palms on the side of my jacket and reminded myself this was my brother's day, not mine. I told myself I would blend into the background a man in a quiet suit here, only to smile, clap, and disappear. But blending in is a trick for those who wear what fashion magazines approve. My suit was a shade too dark wool, a little too heavy for George's air, and the tie something I had kept since my first job in finance. Most of all, the silver pocket watch my father's rested heavy in my vest pocket, its chain dull from decades of handling. The laughter began in ripples, subtle at first, a murmur that traveled from pew to pew. I felt it the way one feels a breeze shift before a storm. A cousin leaned into another grinning. 2 ushers chuckled under their breath. I kept my head high, eyes forward, though every tick of the watch felt like a spotlight. Joelle, my brother's new wife, made sure her voice carried across the sanctuary. "Calder's dressed for a funeral instead of a wedding," she said with that bright, rehearsed laugh. Her eyes slid to my vest pocket. "And what's that? Did the museum loan you an exhibit?" Her friends laughed, fanning themselves with programs. I stood still, my face warm not from the heat, but from the knowledge that every glance was sliding over me. In those moments, I remembered a lesson my father once pressed into my hand along with the watch. A man doesn't lose dignity unless he throws it away. So I smiled. I smiled, though it was thin, the kind that bends, but doesn't break. I nodded to an aunt, shook the hand of a college friend of Retson's, and made no reply to Joelle. The air thickened with perfume and candle smoke cloying as pity. Retson shone at the altar broad-shouldered in a tuxedo, tailored to perfection. His grin was easy polished for cameras, and he threw it around like confetti. When his eyes caught mine, there was a flash, something sharper than brotherhood, something closer to mockery. It was then Major General Whitmore, white-haired and upright, moved across the aisle. His medals chimed faintly as he bent not to Retson, not to the laughing crowd, but toward me. Or rather, toward the watch. He inclined his head a bow, small but unmistakable, as if acknowledging an old comrade. The laughter stuttered, stopped, fell away. People turned uncertain. The scent of magnolia grew heavier in the silence. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the watch, cracked at the hinge, but still steady in its tick. The bow was so brief it could have been imagined, but I knew what I saw. I swallowed against the lump in my throat and pressed into my role, the quiet one, the overlooked. I endured the next hour without flair or fuss, clinking a glass of champagne afterward, with the same forced smile I had carried for years at company banquets. Every toast, every congratulation to Retson I joined in, but my chest burned as if the suit was made of iron. Children darted between tables at the reception, their laughter more honest than the laughter I'd received earlier. I tried to focus on them on Evelyn's steady hand on my arm when she managed to reach me through the crowd, but even she could not block the whispers that followed. Words like antique, outdated, strange hung in the air. When the night waned, I stepped out to the patio for air. Candle smoke still clung to my jacket. The magnolia blossoms wilted slightly under the weight of the evening. Behind me, through the hum of conversation, I heard my brother's voice, sharp, careless, not meant for my ears. "The fund will cover it," Retson muttered to Joel, "as long as he doesn't dig." I stood still, the watch ticking like a drumbeat against my ribs. I didn't know then exactly what he meant, but the words carved themselves into me deeper than the laughter had. The storm came in low from the coast, its wind rattling the shutters of the old brick building where Wynn Maritime kept its records. I had grown used to that sound wood against wood, a reminder that even strong things could loosen with time. That afternoon, as I sifted through the retirement fund folder on the office computer, I discovered something that rattled louder than the storm. The email looked ordinary, at first a memo about quarterly contributions, polite phrasing about liquid asset allocation. But halfway down, thick black bars cut through sentences censoring, as if the company were suddenly a government agency. I scrolled back up, checked again, printed the page to see if the printer would give me more than the screen did. It didn't. The words were blotted out ugly, like someone had hidden a bruise under makeup. I held the paper close to the desk lamp. The ink smelled sharp chemical mingling with the must of wood cabinets. My eyes traced the signature block the font didn't match. Where the body was Times New Roman, the signature sat in a faint Arial, the letters too evenly spaced to be real. My pen scratched across a yellow pad as I wrote down the file number, the date. The date hit me harder than the forgery. It aligned perfectly with the purchase of Retson's new property, a riverfront condo that had been the talk of Savannah's business pages. I sat back in the chair, the storm tapping harder at the glass, and the watch in my vest pocket began to tick louder than before. When I got home, Evelyn noticed my mood before I said a word. She set down a pan of cornbread on the table, brushed flour from her apron, and frowned. "You've been digging again," she said softly. I unfolded the memo across the dinner table. Candlelight flickered against the black bars, making them look like open wounds. Evelyn's eyes scanned the page, her lips pressing thin. "Calder, this isn't just paperwork. If you chase this, you'll pit yourself against your brother, against the family. Do you want to be the man who tears everything apart?" Her words cut deep because she wasn't wrong. I wanted truth, but truth had teeth, and they usually bit hardest at home. I nodded, though my hand still traced the lines of the memo, as if by sheer touch I could reveal what had been hidden. Later that evening, Noah dropped into the living room with a textbook under his arm. 21 and restless, he smelled faintly of cologne and library dust. "Dad?" he asked, "what matters more, loyalty or honesty?" The question, unprovoked, made me glance at him sharply. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "In class today, someone said loyalty keeps families together, but honesty keeps people sane. I figured you'd know." His eyes, sharp and too much like mine, lingered on the paper still spread across the coffee table. I reached for words, but only found silence. Evelyn touched my wrist, gently, signaling that too much said aloud could ignite what we weren't ready to face. I smiled weakly at Noah. "Both matter," I told him. "But sometimes one shows up when the other hides." He seemed unsatisfied, yet he nodded, retreating to his room. Alone again, I picked up the paper. The ink smeared faintly onto my fingertips. I slipped it into a folder I kept locked in my briefcase, the watch chain brushing against my knuckles as I did. Its ticking sounded louder than the storm outside, like a heartbeat urging me forward when reason begged me back. The house quieted. Evelyn hummed in the kitchen. Noah's footsteps faded overhead. I allowed myself a long breath. Maybe tomorrow I would file the memo away, pretend it was nothing. Maybe I'd let Retson have his condo, his lifestyle, his way. Then my phone lit up on the table. One new message. The number was blocked. The words stark. Stop digging or lose everything. I sat frozen, the screen casting pale light across the ink-stained paper. The watch ticked against my chest like a verdict. The diner on River Street was never meant to impress anyone. Its floors creaked when the tide was high, and the menus carried a thin coat of bacon grease no one had bothered to wipe for years. Outside, the Savannah River rolled brown and wide-tugging barges past the windows, with a patience that mocked the rush of the tourists. Inside, locals nursed burnt coffee like it was medicine. I had not seen Silas Drew in months, maybe longer, but he looked almost exactly as I remembered. Lean shoulders stooped under a gray tweed jacket, spectacles polished with the corner of a napkin and a pencil tucked behind his ear as though he might need to tally a column at any moment. He was my father's old CFO, the man who had once told me that neat ledges were a form of prayer. When I slid into the booth across from him, the vinyl hissed under my weight. "Honesty outlasts laughter," he said before I could greet him. His voice was low and raspy, the sound of timber settling in an attic. He leaned closer, the steam from his mug wreathing his face. "People laugh at you at your clothes, even at that watch of yours. But paper has the last word." I felt the weight of the watch in my vest pocket cool against my chest. The waitress appeared, refilled both mugs, and left without waiting for thanks. The coffee was as bitter as it had been 20 years ago. Silas slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside was a single letter, yellowed and brittle. A thank you note from Major General Whitmore to my father, dated in the late 80s. The general's words praised steadfast support for enlisted families. At the bottom, the signatures leaned toward each other like two men holding the same line. "He wore that watch the day this was signed," Silas murmured. "That's why the general bowed to you. He wasn't bowing to cloth or coin. He was bowing to memory." My hand trembled slightly as I folded the letter back into its envelope. I tried to anchor myself by focusing on the ordinary things, the smell of bacon fat crisping on the griddle, the clink of forks, the faint hum of gospel playing from a dusty radio behind the counter. "I've collected some things," I said, sliding copies of invoices across to him. "They don't add up." He read them the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. His pencil tapped against the columns, dates, amounts, vendor names. He drew lines down the back of a placemat, creating neat rows. "This transfer here," he said, tapping the name Coastal Atlantic Services 2 days before your brother closed on that condo. "You know the charter can that kind of borrowing happen?" "No," I said quietly. "Not without notice. And never to a vendor that doesn't exist on the approved list." "Good. Write that." He watched me copy his words onto a yellow legal pad. "Now listen carefully. Buy a 3-inch binder, acid-free sleeves. Every document you print, slide into a sleeve top right corner marked with date, time, and source. Photograph the document inside the sleeve so no one can claim you tampered. Keep a table of contents. Sign across the staples. That way, if a page disappears, the break will betray the thief." I managed a small laugh. "You make it sound like espionage. It's not. It's discipline." He sipped his coffee, grimaced, then went on. "Paper first, people second. That order will keep you standing." The bell over the door jingled and Evelyn entered, shaking drizzle from her shawl. She slid in beside me, her warmth a balm against the damp air. She smiled at Silas with the respect of someone who had heard his name for years. Her hand brushed mine under the table, steady grounding. Silas lifted another invoice. See this contract, round number no sense. Description looks stamped. That's lazy. Lazy lies are the best entry points. Follow them. He lined up 2 routing numbers, drew his pencil straight through. They match across 2 different companies, Sable Tide Consulting and Coastal Atlantic. Same bank, same branch. That's a shell whether or not your brother admits it. The word made my stomach turn. Why would he risk that? Pressure, Silas said simply. Investors breathing down his neck. Pride heavier than prudence. A man cornered by expectations will take shortcuts he once swore he wouldn't. Evelyn leaned in. And if Calder keeps pulling at this thread, then he needs to do it right. Silas replied. His eyes met mine, calm as ledger lines. No shouting, no threats. Just ask in a boardroom voice, may we see the approved vendor list? That question is harder to laugh off than any suit. The waitress returned with plates. Silas took eggs and grits. I picked at dry toast. My appetite had shrunk to the size of my conscience. I wrote notes while Silas spoke metadata screenshots, blind copying files to a notary sealing backups at the bank. Each step felt like armor being buckled piece by piece. When we finally stood to leave, Silas rested a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm but not heavy. Quiet steps, Calder. Straight and quiet. The loud man burns out. The steady man finishes the race. Then he tipped his hat and walked into the drizzle, vanishing among umbrellas. Evelyn and I crossed to the car where Noah waited, textbooks spread over the back seat like temporary walls. He looked up, eyes bright, jaw tight with questions he'd been saving. Dad, he asked without preamble, if Uncle lied, would you cover for him or not? The rain ticked on the roof, steady as a clock. The pocket watch thumped in my vest with each beat of my heart, as if demanding an answer I wasn't ready to give. Sunday dinners at my mother's house had always been elaborate affairs, even when the family was at its most frayed. Miriam believed in roast chicken the way some people believed in hymns, prepare it faithfully, and maybe the cracks between loved ones would soften. That evening in the spring of 2020, the dining room smelled of garlic and thyme of butter sliding under crisped skin. Cicadas shrilled from the trees outside the open windows, a southern chorus that didn't care who won the argument. We gathered around the oak table, plates steaming, silverware polished. Retson sat at the head, grinning as if the world were his to carve, his tuxedo replaced by a crisp business shirt with cuffs that seemed cut from arrogance. Joelle leaned close, whispering in his ear, and Miriam busied herself with napkins folded into careful triangles. Noah sat to my right, watchful and quiet, his fork tracing invisible patterns on the tablecloth. Glasses were filled, the clink of crystal announcing a toast. Retson stood raising his wine. To Calder, he said, voice loud enough to echo against the china cabinet. Still counting pennies while the rest of us build futures. Laughter broke out, sharp, unkind, a ripple of mirth that left me sitting in silence while my pulse thudded. Joelle's laugh rang a little too high, a little too eager. I didn't rise, didn't protest. My hand found the pocket watch, its chain cool between my fingers. I wanted to anchor myself in its weight. Some of us, I said softly, believe futures are built on what's accounted for, not what's borrowed. The words cooled the air, though Joelle's eyes sharpened. She leaned toward my mother and muttered just loud enough, "The board knows where the loyalty lies." Her glance landed like a dart on Miriam, who kept her gaze fixed on her plate. My mother's silence stung more than the joke. She served peas as if nothing had been said, her hands steady, though her shoulders sagged. I wished she would meet my eyes, offer some signal that my caution wasn't madness. But she didn't, and in that absence, I felt more alone than ever. Paranoid Retson scoffed, sliding into his chair. He cut the roast chicken with exaggerated vigor juices staining the platter. "You've always had a talent for suspicion, brother. Maybe that's why you never built anything bigger than a binder." The jab found its mark. My throat tightened. Silverware clattered as Joelle refilled glasses too quickly, the wine sloshing over rims. The room swelled with voices, his baritone her conspiratorial laughter, Miriam's clipped attempts at grace. I tried to hold the line. This isn't about suspicion, it's about clarity. Funds vanish. Invoices don't match enough. Retson snapped, slamming his fork. "Do you really want to embarrass this family in front of our mother? Do you want Noah to see you twist shadows into accusations?" Noah's eyes darted between us. He said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw told me he was taking notes the way young men do, writing scripts of manhood in his mind. The heat of the evening seemed to close in. Cicadas screamed louder. My pulse surged. I shifted in my chair and the chain snagged. The watch slipped from my vest pocket. For one suspended second I thought I could catch it, but gravity had already claimed the heirloom. It hit the hardwood with a sound that cut deeper than laughter. A sharp crack followed by the sickening spiderweb spread of glass across its face. The room fell silent. Even Retson's smirk faltered as all eyes turned to the shattered relic on the floor. I bent to retrieve it. The cool metal now marred the delicate glass, fractured into a map of failure. My fingers trembled as I closed the cover, but the damage was irreversible. The watch still ticked faintly, stubbornly, but its dignity had been cracked open. Miriam finally looked at me. Her eyes were wide, troubled. Her lips pressed together as if a word might slip out she couldn't afford to speak. She lowered her gaze almost instantly back to her lap, leaving me holding the ruined piece of family history like a condemned man holding his own verdict. Joelle broke the silence first, her laugh thin and brittle. "Even the antiques can't handle the pressure," she said. The attempt at humor landed hollow. Retson chuckled once low, then resumed carving the chicken, his knife rasping against the bones with a rhythm that sounded like dismissal. I tucked the broken watch back into my pocket, its edges biting through the cloth. The meal went on, but every bite was ashes. Noah pushed food around his plate, and Evelyn, who had been silent until then, placed a gentle hand on mine under the table. She didn't speak, but the gesture told me she saw the wound and wasn't blind to it. When dinner ended, I walked to the porch air heavy with honeysuckle and smoke from a neighbor's grill. The cicadas still shrieked. I forced myself to breathe, one hand pressed against the ruined watch as though holding it could hold me together too. The mailbox stood at the edge of the drive, black paint peeling under the humid night. I opened it and found a single envelope, heavy, cream-colored official. My name was written in precise type across the front. I didn't need to open it to know. The board had summoned me. I closed the lid softly, though my hands shook. The night had grown louder, every sound magnified, the rustle of leaves, the tick of insects, the faint buzz of the porch light. The summons felt less like paper and more like a verdict already delivered. I slipped the envelope under my arm, turned toward the house glowing behind me, and wondered how many more Sunday dinners we would share before truth broke more than a watch. The boardroom at Wynn Maritime smelled of cedar polish and fear. The long panelled table gleamed under recessed lights, its surface reflecting the portraits of past executives who stared down from the walls, frozen in oil paint dignity. Their gazes seemed to watch as I entered with my leather binder pressed against my chest, the broken pocket watch ticking faintly in my vest as if urging patience. I had rehearsed this walk in my mind countless times. Still, when the heavy door closed behind me, the quiet swallowed me whole. Board members shifted in their high-backed chairs, some adjusting spectacles, others folding hands over aged ledgers. They were men and women who had built their lives around numbers and ships, retirees in waiting, who measured stability by the inch. At the head of the table sat Retson, crisp in a navy suit, his smile sharper than any blade. Joelle perched just behind him, smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. Silas was already there, seated near the far end. He looked up, adjusted his glasses, and gave me the faintest nod. That single gesture steadied me. I slid my binder onto the table, its edges worn from weeks of travel between my office and our dining room. Tabs in red, blue, and yellow marked invoices, emails, and notarized preservation notices. The click of the binder rings opening cut through the hush like a gavel. Before I could begin, a junior accountant at the back, barely more than a girl, her blazer too big for her frame, whispered to her neighbor, "Signatures don't match." Her words fluttered through the air, fragile before she silenced herself with a bitten lip. But the seed had been planted. I cleared my throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've brought documents concerning irregularities in our retirement fund." My voice was steady, but I clasped my hands tightly to hide their tremor. "These are not assumptions. They are dates, amounts, signatures, facts preserved as carefully as our ledgers demand." Retson laughed low and dismissive. "This again, Calder, you've envied me since you were old enough to balance a checkbook. Shall we waste everyone's time with your binder of grievances?" The insult stung, but I didn't bite. Instead, I turned a tab and pulled out the first page. A payment authorization dated May 2018. "This," I said, sliding it across, "was signed under your name, Retson. Yet the signature diverges from every verified sample. Compare it yourselves." One of the older members, a man with white hair and hands ink-stained from decades at ledgers, adjusted his spectacles. He compared the two sheets I laid before him, one genuine, one forged. His jaw tightened. "This is my signature," he murmured, "but I never signed this authorization." The silence that followed was different this time, not wary but crackling as though the air itself had begun to split. Murmurs rose, papers rustled, eyes darted between Retson and me. Joelle shifted her smirk, fading as her nails clicked against the chair. I pressed forward. The binder contains 15 such inconsistencies, invoices to vendors that don't exist, payments routed through shell companies, dates aligned suspiciously with personal acquisitions. I turned another tab, revealing a receipt carefully sleeved. This one, for example, a wire transfer drawn directly from company reserves. I paused, then placed beside it a deed. It was applied to the mortgage of Retson Wynn's riverfront property. The room erupted in whispers, some sharp, some fearful. One woman covered her mouth, another scribbled furiously into her notes. A few leaned toward Silas, who sat like a statue, arms folded, his gaze unwavering. Retson rose slowly, palms pressing flat on the table. A bead of sweat traced the line of his collar. "You think a few papers prove theft?" His voice cracked slightly before regaining steel. Funds move. Accounts cross. You don't understand corporate fluidity. Calder, you've always been a small man with small vision. I met his eyes. Maybe, but small men can count, and I've counted more than missing sense. I've counted broken trust, and the trust is owed to the very people who worked their lives into these docks, these ships, this company. For a moment I thought I heard my father's voice in my own quiet, steady, unshaken by thunder. The chair of the board. A woman with pearls at her throat leaned forward. We will need to review these documents carefully. Allegations of this gravity demand full transparency. The binder remained open pages gleaming under the recessed lights. My heart pounded, yet I forced my hands to rest calmly on the table. I would not give Retson the satisfaction of seeing me tremble. He leaned closer, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear. His breath carried the faint tang of wine. "This isn't over," he hissed. "The public will laugh you out of this town." The portraits of past executives loomed above us, silent judges in oil and frame. I closed the binder softly, my watch ticking faintly against my chest, a reminder that time like truth kept moving, whether anyone approved or not. Floodlights flickered along the rafters of Veterans Hall, casting long shadows across rows of folding chairs. The place smelled of waxed floors, old flags, and the faint sweetness of punch poured too early. I stood at the edge of the stage binder in hand, its spine repaired with tape, but heavier than any ledger I had ever carried. The pocket watch ticked faintly in my vest, its glass cracked, yet its heart beating still. The summer air clung thick, and fans hummed against the walls, pushing around heat that refused to leave. Workers filled the chairs, their shirts damp with labor, their faces lined with years of service to the docks and ships. Veterans sat among them, coats pressed metals pinned some leaning on canes. The hall was meant for remembrance, not confrontation, yet here we were. When I stepped to the microphone, the scrape of my shoes echoed. The projector hummed, casting the first image on the screen, 2 invoices side by side. One authentic, signed and notarized. The other its font uneven, the signature forced. I pointed with a steady hand, though inside my chest felt like it would split. "This is the company's money," I said. "Your money. Redirected, reshaped, made to look legitimate. But truth, no matter how it's dressed, doesn't forget where it came from." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A man in the front row adjusted his cap jaw set. Behind him, Evelyn sat with Noah, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Noah leaned forward restless, his eyes flicking between me and his uncle seated near the aisle. Silas rose from his chair on stage and stepped to the screen. His voice was slow, precise, the way numbers are when they refuse to bend. These documents were preserved under standard audit procedure. Timestamps, witness initials all intact. He flipped a page, underlined a discrepancy. "If there is doubt, the binder can be reviewed by any independent party. I'll stand by the integrity of every sheet." The room quieted respect following his calm authority. I knew then why my father had trusted Silas all those years, why honesty needed guardians more than soldiers. At the back, Retson shifted in his seat, sweat forming at his temples. Joelle leaned close, whispering something sharp. Miriam sat beside them, hands folded, her gaze far away, as though she could leave the room by sheer will. I turned the page, revealing receipts, wire transfers, property deeds. One by one the crowd watched as the story unfolded, not through my voice, but through the unyielding language of ink and numbers. The fund that should secure retirements, I said, was siphoned into private accounts, homes, luxuries, distractions. And it was done under the guise of family stewardship. The murmurs grew louder. Folding chairs creaked as workers shifted, some muttering prayers, others curses. Then Major General Whitmore, guest of honor, stood. Time had curved his shoulders, but his voice carried through the hall like a drum. "I served alongside your father," he said, looking at me. A man who carried a silver pocket watch into every meeting, every inspection. He told me once, "This watch isn't just mine. It reminds me that men are measured by what they guard when no one's looking." His eyes flicked to my vest, "And I see you carry it still." I pulled the watch into view. The crack across its face caught the floodlight, fractured into jagged lines, but the ticking persisted. The hall grew silent. The general walked forward, boots firm against the floor, and bowed slightly toward me and the watch. His salute was not to victory, but to vigilance. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. In that pause, the years of mockery at weddings, dinners, and offices seemed to dissolve, replaced by a collective reckoning. The community saw not a feud between brothers, but a struggle for the integrity of what they had built with their own hands. Retson rose abruptly. His chair scraped hard against the floor, the sound jolting the silence. "This spectacle means nothing," he spat. "Do you think parading papers makes you a savior? You've broken this family apart." Joelle gathered her bag and tugged Miriam to her feet, whispering fiercely as they hurried toward the exit. Heads turned, whispers trailed them, the kind that linger long after footsteps fade. I watched them leave, my heart tightening not with triumph, but with grief. Noah's eyes followed too, confusion and hurt etched across his young face. Evelyn's hand rested on his arm, steadying him, as only a mother could. I closed the binder softly, the projector still humming, pages glowing faintly on the screen. The hall remained hushed, as if waiting for the next word, but I had said enough. The truth now lived outside my mouth, etched into paper, carried by witnesses, anchored in memory. As I stepped back from the podium, the cracked watch pressed against my chest, I felt both heavier and lighter. The general's bow lingered in my mind. "Honesty outlasts laughter," Silas had once told me, and tonight it felt as if honesty had finally spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. The little shop on River Street smelled of brass oil and patience. Rows of clocks lined the walls, mantel clocks, cuckoos, sleek wristwatches, each ticking at its own rhythm, a chorus of time layered upon itself. The autumn light drifted through the window, softening on glass cases, where gears winked faintly like old eyes. Silas pressed the pocket watch into my palm. The crack that had spider-webbed its face was gone, replaced with a smooth sheet of glass. I turned it gently, half afraid it might shatter again under my thumb, but the steady tick reassured me. "Things broken," Silas said, his voice low enough to mingle with the shop's ticking, "can be made to last again." The words reached beyond the metal. I heard them in my chest, and the ache of long months of board meetings, testimonies, and the slow grind of truth against denial. I had expected vindication to taste sweet. Instead, it tasted weary. And here Silas was reminding me that repair, quiet, deliberate, might be more enduring than victory. Noah wandered nearby, running his hand along the glass cases, his reflection fractured by rows of pocket watches suspended like pendulums in air. He pretended to study them, but I could feel his eyes slide back to me, gauging not the watch, but the man holding it. "I keep thinking about suing him personally," I said. dragging Retson through every court that'll listen, making the truth so loud he can't ever whisper again. My voice felt rough, worn by the thought itself. Silas adjusted his spectacles, then lifted a rag from the counter, oil-stained and thin from years of use. "Battles," he said, polishing a clock face with slow, practiced circles, "are sometimes won by refusing to fight them. The courts are already moving. Let them carry the weight. You've carried enough." The tick of the repaired watch filled the pause. I held it close to my ear, listening to its rhythm sync with the dozens around me. For the first time since it had shattered, the sound felt less like judgment and more like mercy. Back at the house that evening, an envelope waited in the stack of mail. The handwriting was my mother's, spare and deliberate. I did not know how deep it went. That was all it said. No greeting, no farewell. Just a single sentence carrying more weight than any apology she had offered aloud. I slipped the note behind the lid of the watch, folding it gently so the glass wouldn't press too hard. The tick carried on as if the words had become part of its mechanism, a reminder not of betrayal, but of acknowledgement. Repair, however faint, had begun. Silas clapped me on the shoulder before leaving. "Clocks don't stop because one gear falters," he said. "Neither should you." When the shop door closed behind him, I sat for a long time with Noah across the table. He watched me, his reflection caught in the glass of the mended watch eyes searching. Not for explanations, not for vengeance. For something simpler, harder, whether integrity could survive bitterness. I felt the weight of his gaze and the steady tick of the watch between us. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to answer with words. The watch ticked for both of us, steady, whole, alive again. The memorial hall opened its doors with sunlight spilling through tall windows, cutting warm shapes across the polished wood floor. The light fell directly onto the new glass case at the front, where my father's portrait rested above the battered silver watch. Behind the glass, the watch gleamed with its repaired face, ticking softly, though inaudible, as if keeping time for everyone gathered. Flags lined the walls, their folds sharp and clean. A brass plaque bore my father's name, etched deep enough to last beyond our own years. The smell of wood polish mixed with faint magnolia drifting in from outside the air, carrying the scent of spring. Rows of folding chairs were filled with workers in pressed shirts, retirees leaning on canes and veterans in dark coats pinned with medals. Silas stood at my side, Evelyn close behind her hand, lightly resting on Noah's shoulder. Noah's eyes were wide, reflecting the glass case, as if he were seeing not just the watch, but the history it carried. Across the room, Major General Whitmore sat with a straight back, his expression solemn but approving. Miriam was not here. Joelle lingered at the back, half-shadowed near the exit, her presence a reminder that fractures do not heal overnight. Yet the hall was filled not with division, but with the hum of community people leaning toward one another, whispering, waiting for the ceremony to begin. I stepped forward to the podium. My hands shook only slightly as I adjusted the microphone. "This hall honors more than one man," I began. My voice carried slowly the timbre of someone not asking for applause, but offering truth. It honors the people who gave their years to this company, to the docks, to the ships, to the work that shaped this town. My father believed trust was the only wealth worth carrying. Today we make that trust permanent. I turned to the screen behind me where charts and documents flickered. "The retirement fund has been rebuilt," I continued. This time it is transparent. Independent oversight. Regular reports accessible to every employee and retiree. It will exist not for executives, not for appearances, but for you. The room held its breath, and then hands came together, hesitant at first, then stronger. The applause swelled until it filled the rafters. I saw veterans nod slowly, workers slap their palms together with calloused hands, and a few retirees wipe their eyes. The clapping was not for me. It was for what we had claimed together, a safeguard, a promise restored. Whitmore rose, cane in hand, and approached the glass case. He touched the brass plaque once, then gave me a curt nod, the kind of acknowledgement that carried more weight than any speech. Silas followed his smile, subdued, but certain, as if his work was finally at rest. Beside me, Noah pressed a hand against the glass that held the watch. His lips moved in a whisper, only I could hear Dad kept it. His reflection merged with mine on the glass, and for a moment I saw both of us standing there, 2 generations linked by the same fragile but persistent tick of time. I felt my throat tighten. The watch, once a prop for ridicule, now stood not as a relic, but as a shared inheritance. A reminder that broken things could be mended, and that honor, once nearly lost, could still be renewed in community. The applause rose again, but I barely heard it. My ears filled instead with the faint hum of clocks, imagined or real ticking in rhythm. When the ceremony ended, hands reached out to clasp mine, rough, trembling hands of men who had hold ropes signed manifests, stood through storms. "Thank you," one whispered. Another said, "Your father would be proud." Each grip was both blessing and burden, a transfer of trust I knew I had to keep alive. I stepped outside at last, leaving the warmth of the hall behind. The river breeze rolled up from the docks carrying the scent of magnolia and salt. The sunlight caught on the water, breaking into shards of silver. It did not feel like triumph. It felt quieter, something sturdier. Repair, not victory. Continuance, not conquest. The watch remained inside, encased in glass, but its presence followed me into the breeze. Time had carried us through humiliation, fracture, reckoning. Now it carried us forward into a legacy no longer private, but shared. As the evening sun slanted across the river, I found myself listening not to applause, but to the steady rhythm of that old watch, its glass mended, its tick softened. What once marked humiliation now keeps time for gratitude, reminding me that justice can be quiet and still carry weight. I've learned that broken things, be it glass family ties, or pride, can sometimes be pieced together into something stronger. Sometimes bridges collapse, so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding. And so I wonder, has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story, or even see you join this circle by leaving a comment or subscribing for more shared reflections.